In regards to the Eucharistic fast of 1957, Pope Pius XII's Motu Proprio Sacrum Communium, dated March 19th, 1957, he reduced the Eucharistic fast from midnight to 3 hours before receiving Holy Communion. However, towards the end of the Motu Proprio, it reads, quote, "But we earnestly exhort priests and the faithful who are able to do so to observe the ancient and venerable form of the Eucharistic fast before Mass or Holy Communion." End quote. And this viewer asked, why do traditional churches and clergy not mention this part of the Motu Proprio, but they only mention the 3 hours, the 3-hour fast as the obligation?
Why they don't mention it, I don't know. This writer raises a good point that when Pope Pius XII gave the permission for the 3-hour fast from solid food and alcoholic beverages, from liquids up to an hour and water anytime, it was a remarkable change in the sense that it changed from the previous, and he says ancient practice of fasting from midnight. And that Eucharistic fast from midnight was an absolute fast banning not only solid food, alcoholic beverages, but even water. So depending on when I was able to attend Mass on a Sunday and receive Holy Communion on Sunday, that person would have to have fasted for hours, perhaps even half a day, if they attended a 12 noon Mass or somewhere around there. So this was a substantial sacrifice that people had to make to receive Holy Communion. They had to prepare themselves for it, and I tend to think that in the course of the years, people who grew up with this became accustomed to the idea and, made the sacrifice to receive our Lord in Holy Communion. In those days, Pope Pius X, as you know, a child might not receive First Holy Communion until he or she was 14 years old or so, right? At that time, they were expected to be able to make a little more of a sacrifice. At that age, with little children, it was more difficult. Obviously, for a little child, 7, 8 years old, to receive Holy Communion fast from midnight, be very careful not to swallow a drop of water and break the fast was a bit of a chore. Pope Pius the 12th was motivated, I think, by the same spirit that St. Pius X had before him, to make the reception of Holy Communion as available as reasonably possible, as spiritually possible, but at the same time, still maintain a fast. One might argue, I believe, rightly, that someone who is obliged to abstain from solid food for 3 hours has to actually be mindful not to eat during that time. One can become hungry 3 hours after eating something, so it does take a bit of mindfulness not to eat. Within that amount of time, the stomach does clear, I understand, of the food that has been consumed, so, the stomach is emptied. After 3 hours of fasting from solid food, and I imagine also from an hour of drink and so on. So, if the idea is to have the stomach emptied for the sake of receiving our Lord worthily, into a body that is ready to just receive Him and not to be encumbered with other foodstuffs and other nutrition and so on, that it serves that purpose. The 3-hour fast does serve that purpose. Pope Pius XII did say that those who can maintain the ancient practice should do so. He encouraged them to do so. That's the word he used, right? Even giving the permission to observe the 3-hour fast, he did encourage them to observe the midnight fast if at all possible. Why priests don't make that point, I don't know. I must say, I myself have made that point only rarely. And I can speak for myself, I made that point rarely because I think that Pope Pius XII saw times ahead when the midnight fast might be very difficult, and that it would keep people away from the Blessed Sacrament at a time when he, as Pope Pius X, recognized people needed access to the Blessed Sacrament. It could very well be, I don't know, Pius XII might have seen, as I'm sure St. Pius X himself foresaw into the future, the times we're living through right now, when the modernists had taken over. I don't know that Pius XII ever alluded to that, but Pius X did. We'd find a situation here where the New Order liturgy came in, the profanation of the Blessed Sacrament, even to the point of rendering perhaps the new Mass itself intrinsically invalid. There are those who argue that point. So that the Catholic people would have access to the Blessed Sacrament only by driving long distances or going through extraordinary travel times. It probably was motivated in the mind of Pope Pius XII by the experience of the war. That certainly had an effect on it. Monsignor Marceau, who was our traditional priest in Florida for quite some time, God rest his soul, was a military chaplain throughout the war. And he described traveling up the front lines in Europe, offering Mass on the hood of a Jeep, traveling further up the lines, offering a second Mass, a third Mass, a fourth Mass, a fifth Mass on a Sunday. The Catholic soldiers, wherever they were entrenched, he would be there to offer Mass for them. The only actual even fluid that they can consume, the only food that they could actually consume was the Blessed Sacrament itself, the whole time. This created some serious difficulties, even in terms of purifying the chalice at the end of Mass. You'd use water to do that. If you can't take a drop of water because you're going to be offering another Mass in those days, even from midnight, let alone 3 hours later, this became not only a personal problem with maintaining one's consciousness and not getting dizzy, but even just as I say, a practical problem of purifying the chalice. The allowance of taking some water at any time meant that if a priest had to offer multiple Masses, he could at least purify the chalice at the end of Mass. Well, Pope Pius XII's allowance actually made that possible. I don't know why, all of the reasons why Pope Pius XII lightened that heavy fast, but I will say that in light of the current day's demands, it has been very helpful with regard to making the traditional Mass and our Lord and Holy Communion available to the people, who often have to travel quite a distance to get to attend Mass. And why priests don't urge others who can observe the stricter fast to do so, I don't know. This question has brought to my mind, though, the need to do so, and I intend to do so. Yeah. I want to bring it to people's attention that if they can observe the midnight fast, they should. He's encouraging them to do so.